Pine Hollow, Vermont, a small mountain town where the air smells of pine and the mornings are wrapped in heavy fog. On the morning of October 12, 2010, that fog seemed thicker than usual, clinging to the narrow streets and silent houses. By midday, a rumor was spreading through the community. By nightfall, it was no longer a rumor. It was a nightmare. Claire Donovan, a 26-year-old high school art teacher, had vanished on her way home. Her walk should have taken less than 10 minutes. It took her out of existence instead. Her purse and jacket were found on a park bench. Her phone was still lit, a text half-typed and unsent. No signs of a struggle. No one saw her leave. Just gone. 7 minutes. That's all it took for Claire to disappear without a trace. And the question that would haunt Pine Hollow for years: how does someone vanish on a familiar road, in broad daylight, without leaving a single footprint behind? The date was Tuesday, October 12, 2010. In Pine Hollow, Vermont, the air was cool enough to see your breath, and a damp fog had rolled in from the surrounding hills, softening the edges of the familiar little town. School had let out hours earlier, but the streets still felt lived in. The scrape of rakes on pavement, the faint bark of a dog from somewhere down the block, the smell of wood smoke in the air. For Claire Donovan, 26, it was supposed to be an ordinary walk home from the high school where she taught art. She had done the same route countless times, a straight shot down Elm Street, then a shortcut through Maple Park, just under a mile in total. That afternoon, though, something about her movements was different. The school's security camera, grainy and color-washed, caught her stepping out the main doors at exactly 4:37 p.m. She had a leather satchel slung across her body, her long dark hair tucked into a cream-colored coat. Her head was tilted toward her phone, thumb moving quickly across the screen. She passed the bike rack, exchanged a quick wave with the janitor, and began her walk. The school's security camera, grainy and color-washed, caught her stepping out the main doors at exactly 4:37 p.m. She had a leather satchel slung across her body, her long dark hair tucked into a cream-colored coat. Her head was tilted toward her phone, thumb moving quickly across the screen. She passed the bike rack, exchanged a quick wave with the janitor, and began her walk. From the school to her house was a route Claire knew well, past the post office, the corner bakery, then into the edge of Maple Park, where a winding path cut through to her neighborhood. It should have taken her 7 to 8 minutes at most. But somewhere inside that window, she vanished. Just after 5 p.m., an older couple walking their dog entered Maple Park from the opposite end. The fog was so thick that shapes appeared only when they were a few yards away. Near a wooden bench along the path, they noticed a bag sitting upright, a cream-colored coat folded beside it. The satchel was unzipped. Inside was Claire's sketchbook, her wallet with cash still inside, and her keys. Her phone was lying screen up on the bench, still lit. The last message she had typed was only half finished. There was no sign of Claire. At 7:15 p.m., after several unanswered calls and texts from friends, one of Claire's colleagues reported her missing. Officer Martin Graves was the first responder to arrive at the park. He later described the scene as eerily intact, like she had simply stood up mid-conversation and walked away. The path was damp from the evening mist, but there were no clear footprints beyond the usual scuff marks from passing joggers. No drag marks, no signs of a struggle. As the search began, the temperature dropped sharply. By 8 p.m., a heavier fog had set in, making visibility almost impossible without flashlights. Volunteers fanned out in small groups, calling her name into the thick air. Every few minutes, the sound would be swallowed by silence. The only other clue came from a small convenience store on Elm Street, whose outdated security camera pointed toward the sidewalk. At 4:40 p.m., the footage showed a dark shape, Claire, walking past the storefront. A few seconds later, another figure appeared, a man in a black hoodie, hands in pockets, walking at a steady distance behind her. The fog made it impossible to see his face. The timestamp showed she was just minutes from the park. Claire's mother, Claire Donovan, got the call at home around 7:30 p.m. She drove straight to the park, headlights cutting through the mist, only to be stopped at the police line. Elaine stood there in the cold for nearly an hour, staring at her daughter's belongings on that bench. It was like she'd been erased, she would later say. By midnight, search dogs were brought in. They caught Claire's scent at the bench, but lost it a few yards down the path, where the trail simply ended. It was as if she had stepped off the face of the earth. In missing persons work, investigators talk about the golden hours, the brief window in which a rescue is most likely. Claire's case was already slipping past that point. Detectives would later stress how unusual the scene was. All valuables left behind. No signs of robbery or sexual assault in the immediate area. The phone active with a half-written text. Most abductions involve some kind of disturbance, but here, nothing in the physical space matched the violence of someone being taken against their will. By the next morning, word of her disappearance had spread across Pine Hollow. The coffee shop near the school buzzed with speculation. Some said she'd run away from problems in her personal life. Others were convinced a stranger had targeted her. But in a town of barely 5,000 people, strangers stand out, and no one could remember seeing anyone unfamiliar hanging around the park. For her students, Wednesday's art class was a silent, hollow thing. Her chair was empty. Her mug still sat on her desk. Parents began walking their children to school again, something they hadn't done in years. By Friday, flyers with Claire's photo, bright-eyed, smiling, were stapled to every telephone pole. For her students, Wednesday's art class was a silent, hollow thing. Her chair was empty, her mug still sat on her desk. Parents began walking their children to school again, something they hadn't done in years. By Friday, flyers with Claire's photo, bright-eyed, smiling, were stapled to every telephone pole. Police built their early timeline. 4:37 p.m., leaves school. 4:40 p.m., passes convenience store, man in hoodie follows. 4:44 p.m., likely enters Maple Park. 5:05 p.m., couple finds belongings on bench. 7:15 p.m., missing persons report filed. Those 7 minutes between the store camera and the park bench would become the focus of the entire case. Why did she leave her coat? Why was her phone out, message half-typed? And who was the man in the hoodie? For now, Pine Hollow had no answers, only a growing fear that whatever happened in that fog wasn't random, and that someone out there knew exactly how Claire disappeared. 7 minutes. A public park and a young woman vanishes without a sound. The question now wasn't just where Claire had gone. It was who had been waiting for her there. The call to the Pine Hollow Police Department came in at exactly 7:15 p.m. on October 12, 2010. On the other end of the line was Rebecca Donovan, Claire's older sister. She'd been expecting Claire for dinner at 6:30. By 7, she knew something was wrong. Claire wasn't the type to disappear without a word, especially not when her phone was on and her last text had been left hanging mid-sentence. When the first patrol car arrived, Officer Daniel Holt immediately noticed the eerie stillness in the park. The thick October fog rolled in so heavily it swallowed the yellow glow of the street lamps. He followed the paved path toward the small wooden bench near the center of Maplewood Park. And there it was. A tan leather purse sitting upright, Claire's gray wool coat folded neatly beside it, and her phone screen glowing faintly in the fog, showing a half-typed message that ended mid-word. Holt glanced around. No signs of struggle, no spilled contents from the bag. The zipper was still shut. Too clean, Holt would later say in his report. If someone took her by force, they did it fast, and they knew exactly what they were doing. By the time the next unit arrived, the temperature had dropped to just above freezing. The fog made visibility less than 30 feet. The ground was damp from earlier drizzle, soft enough to leave impressions, but even that advantage was limited. Every minute they waited, moisture blurred details and the biting air made it harder for canine units to hold a scent. The first search perimeter was small, half a mile in all directions from the park bench. Holt and Officer Marquez walked the main trail toward the western exit, flashlights cutting thin tunnels through the fog. About 100 yards from the bench, they saw it. Faint impressions of a sneaker sole, smaller than a man's size 9, matching what Claire's sister confirmed were her white Converse shoes. The prints led toward the north trail, which eventually wound past a small parking lot rarely used at night. And then, nothing. The prints simply vanished. It wasn't that the trail ended, they just stopped. Either she was lifted off her feet or stepped onto a surface that didn't hold prints. In weather like this, both were possible. While officers secured the area, a teenager named Evan Brooks, a senior at Pine Hollow High, came forward. He'd seen Claire less than 15 minutes before the police arrived. She was walking faster than usual, he told investigators, shifting nervously as the tape recorder clicked on. I think she was on a call. She had her phone to her ear and, I don't know, she just looked tense. Evan's detail about the phone matched perfectly. When police collected it, the last activity was an open text, draft, timestamped at 4:41 p.m. But his next statement changed the tone of the interview. I saw someone behind her. A guy. Tall. Hoodie pulled up over his head. Dark jeans. He was maybe, 10 meters. Maplewood Park didn't have surveillance cameras, but a small corner store across from the park's east exit did. Owner Salvatore Sal Ricci allowed police to review footage from that afternoon. The grainy black and white feed showed the park entrance through a haze of fog. At 4:38 p.m., Claire walked past, white sneakers visible even in the low-res footage. 10 seconds later, a dark shape emerged behind her. A tall man in a black hoodie walking at a steady pace. He glanced left and right before disappearing into the park entrance. There was no footage of either leaving. The east-facing camera didn't capture any other clear shots, which meant either they left together from another exit, or only one of them came back out. At 8:50 p.m., while officers were canvassing the neighborhood, a taxi driver named Paul Newton offered an odd detail. Around 5:05 p.m., he'd driven past the North Trail lot, a tiny gravel strip that barely fit 4 cars. Parked at the far end was a dark-colored SUV with its lights off. Next to it stood a man in a hoodie. Paul thought it was odd but didn't stop. He couldn't recall the make or plate number of the vehicle, but he was sure about the hoodie. When shown still images from the convenience store footage, Paul hesitated but nodded. Yeah, that's him, I think. By midnight, Pine Hollow PD called in the Vermont State Police for assistance. Search teams, officers, firefighters, and volunteers moved in tight formation through the park with high-powered lights. Canine handlers brought in scent dogs, starting from Claire's coat. They followed the trail through the north trail path, same as the officers earlier. The dogs pulled hard toward the parking lot and stopped at the gravel edge. From there, the scent was gone. This was consistent with someone getting into a vehicle. One of the dogs, a German shepherd named Rex, gave a short alert at the far end of the lot where a patch of dirt had been disturbed. Officers found what looked like a partial boot print, larger than Claire's shoe, likely a man's size 11 or 12. The tread pattern was unfamiliar to Holt, as the damp surface had already blurred its edges. At 1:12 a.m., detectives went to Rebecca Donovan's home. Her parents had driven in from Rutland, pale and silent. Claire's father, Thomas Donovan, kept asking the same question. She wouldn't just leave her things. She wouldn't do that. Detectives confirmed they were treating it as a possible abduction. That word, abduction, changed everything for the family. Hope turned to fear. Fear turned to anger. Thomas slammed his fist into the arm of the couch. Rebecca started pacing the room, saying over and over, "She's out there. She's out there. She's out there." The next morning, Pine Hollow was buzzing with theories. Some claimed Claire had mentioned meeting someone after school. Others pointed to her recent breakup with Jason Ward. Jason had been engaged to Claire for almost a year before she broke it off 3 weeks earlier, citing irreconcilable differences. Jason was brought in for questioning that same afternoon. He denied any involvement and produced an alibi. He'd been in a budget meeting at his Burlington office until 6 p.m., corroborated by 3 co-workers. But when detectives asked if he'd seen Claire recently, his answer was vague. "I might have driven past the school once or twice." That was enough to keep him in the back of investigators' minds. On October 13th, a volunteer searcher named Mark Alvarez reported finding something near the southern edge of the park, a crumpled piece of paper lodged in the roots of an oak tree. It was a page from a sketchbook. The paper was damp but intact, showing a charcoal drawing of the park gazebo. Rebecca confirmed it looked like Claire's style. That evening, detectives returned to the North Trail lot for a closer sweep. Under one of the gravel piles at the corner, they found a small metallic object, a single silver earring in the shape of a teardrop. Rebecca confirmed Claire had worn them often. The problem? The earring had no traceable prints, and the backing was missing. It could be a sign of a struggle or just an earring that fell unnoticed. But for investigators, it was the first physical item potentially linking the parking lot to Claire's disappearance. Flyers went up across Pine Hollow showing the grainy still of the hooded figure. Calls came in, but none were concrete. Some claimed it was a local drifter. Others thought it might be a seasonal worker from the ski resort. Every lead fizzled. By October 20th, 1 week after Claire vanished, the official search was scaled back. Detectives kept working angles, but without a suspect, vehicle ID, or solid witness beyond vague descriptions, the case was already in danger of going cold. The last real movement came from a crime lab update. The partial boot print was too degraded to match any database entry. The trail had gone dark. And in the fog that had hidden so much that night, the truth about what happened to Claire Donovan stayed buried, waiting for the day something or someone would bring it back into the light. By the fall of 2010, Pine Hollow High School's art room felt like Claire Donovan's second heartbeat. The space was small, but it carried a warmth that didn't come from the radiator. It came from the way she arranged it. Jars of brushes stood like soldiers, sorted from fan to filbert to fineliner. The paper cabinet was labeled with neatly printed tape: newsprint, cold press, canvas board. On windowsill, a row of student-made clay cups held pencils sharpened to the same satisfying point. At 7:30 a.m. most mornings, Claire arrived before the hallways filled. She'd switch on the desk lamp instead of the ceiling lights because she said overheads bleached the truth out of colors. She laid out reference photos: mist on a lake, bare maple branches, the curved shadow that late afternoon light makes on white siding. She believed students painted better when they felt seen rather than judged, so she crouched to their level and said things like, "Try it. If it's wrong, it's only paper." And, "Look again. Don't draw what you think a tree looks like. Draw what this one does." On Monday, October 11, the day before she vanished, she introduced a lesson called Fog and Form, how to paint edges that disappear without losing the shape beneath. She sketched the gazebo at Maplewood Park in vine charcoal, explaining negative space and soft blends. She'd promised to finish the demonstration on Tuesday. Her easel held that promise the morning after she disappeared, half of the gazebo clear, half dissolving into white, a stark rectangle of work that looked like a sentence left mid-breath. Pine Hollow wasn't big enough to be anonymous and wasn't small enough to be nosy by default. It lived in the middle, a town where you learned the names of dogs long before their owners, where Murphy's Bar saved your favorite table if you were 5 minutes late, and where Saturday meant the farmer's market on Cedar with cider donuts gone by 10. Claire slipped into that rhythm without fanfare. She harmonized with the church choir when they were short of voice, donated framed student prints to the library fundraiser, and organized a once-a-month Sketch the Park morning for kids who never signed up for anything at school but came because Claire asked. She didn't demand participation. She earned it. If you promised to be there at 6, she arrived at 5:58 with extra folding chairs because someone always forgot theirs. When she logged volunteer hours, Claire's parents lived an hour away in Rutland. Elaine texted goodnight every evening no matter what. Thomas called on Sundays at 9. The Thursday before Claire disappeared, they'd eaten roast chicken at the kitchen table, the kind of dinner that makes you forget clocks. Claire boxed leftovers for her sister Rebecca and scrawled a note on the container. "Don't burn your tongue this time." Small kindnesses became artifacts later, imbued with weight they didn't carry when she wrote them. Rebecca and Claire were the kind of sisters people mistook for best friends. They kept a shared notes app titled "When the Fog Lifts," with a list of things they'd do once the weather settled. Hot chocolate at Whitman's, first snow sketches at the lake, a road trip to Montreal in November if the roads stayed dry. After Claire disappeared, Rebecca opened that list a dozen times a day, not to read, but to anchor herself to a thread that still connected them. On Monday night, October 11, 9:13 p.m., Claire left Rebecca a voicemail. "Don't wait on me tomorrow. I might try the creek path. It's faster." She hadn't said that to anyone else. The change in route, quiet, fog-heavy, and lined with trees, would become a hinge in the timeline. The photos on Claire's fridge told a sweet story. A Christmas engagement under string lights, her hand held up, ring catching the camera flash, Jason Ward smiling in a way that, at first glance, read as soft. The months between that December and the fall of 2010 told another story entirely. Not a clean break, a slow, grinding friction. Arguments hid in small places. Who she texted, when she stayed late, why she double-locked their apartment door. He asked for spreadsheets of grades. He asked why she needed a lock screen on her phone. He asked why she didn't answer in 4 minutes instead of 11. Most days, she managed it like the rest of adulthood. Patience, boundaries, hope. Other days, the foundation hissed like a frayed wire. In late September, Claire signed a month-to-month lease on an attic room 3 blocks from school. 2 boxes of books, 1 duffel bag, her easel, a kettle. She told Rebecca it wasn't punitive. "I need my breathing to be mine," she said. "If we're good, space helps. If we're not, space tells." Claire didn't catastrophize. She planned and adapted and kept going. But the last week of her life, she said 2 things that did not sound like the Claire everyone knew. To Ms. Harper in the copy room on Thursday, October 7th. "Do you ever feel like someone's matching your steps?" To Maya, a junior who stayed late on Monday, October 11th. "If I'm not in by 5, text Miss Klein to unlock my room, okay?" A contingency she had never asked for in 3 years of teaching. She also changed a habit. Instead of catching a ride with Rebecca or taking Main Street, that she cut through Maplewood Park. Faster, yes. Quieter, always, especially in fog. That was the day she texted Rebecca. "Leaving now, phone at 19%. If it dies, 6:30 at yours." Police recovered the phone from the park bench with 17% battery remaining and an unsent text on the screen. At the Teenagers live by patterns. Who sits where at lunch, which teacher rounds up grades, which cars idle outside the side lot after last bell. In the days after Claire vanished, 3 students separately told detectives they'd seen a black SUV parking across from the school's side lot most afternoons for 2 weeks. Engine idling, driver wearing a cap low over his brow. They'd joked it was a parent who couldn't navigate the pickup line. Maya added that on Friday, October 8th, she saw the same SUV creep past the art room windows just after dismissal. Traffic cameras at that corner were old and glitchy in fog. No plate, no clear make. Still, the details stacked onto other details. A man in a hoodie captured by a convenience store camera trailing Claire. A taxi driver who remembered a hooded man standing beside a dark SUV near the park's north lot around 5:05 p.m. A short, specific window in which Claire entered the park and never walked out. Claire had boundaries everywhere, not just at home. In September, a parent named Doug Kramer confronted her near the school entrance about his son's grade. Voices rose. A vice principal stepped in. Kramer had no record of violence, but the incident made the suspect list because lists begin wide and narrow with evidence, not intuition. There was also Leo, a man who slept under the river bridge and collected returnable cans in Maplewood Park. He had the kind of stare people read as threat when they wanted an easy answer. Pine Hollow did what small towns do under pressure. It looked hard at the person it usually looked away from. Police spoke to Leo twice. Both times he produced a shelter sign-in showing he checked in at 4:55 p.m. on October 12th. He was ruled out. The timeline sings like a metronome. 4:37 p.m., Claire leaves school. 4:38, she passes the corner store camera. 4:39, senior Josh Larkin sees her answer a call and quicken her pace. 4:41, unsent text on Claire's phone reads, "At the." 4:44, likely enters Maplewood Park along the east path. 5:05, an older couple finds her coat and bag on a bench. The phone is lit with the draft message open. Phone records show that 12-second call at 4:39 came from a blocked number that pinged a tower serving half the town, and then went dark. A burner. It did what burners are meant to do. Claire kept one spiral-bound notebook for herself. No lock, no melodrama, just a place to think. On October 11th, her final entry read, "There are things I'm not ready to say out loud yet. I need to be more careful." She didn't specify who or what. She didn't draw arrows or initials. Investigators copied the page and taped it inside the case binder. Underneath, in red ink, they wrote 3 questions. Careful of who? Careful where? Careful when? On a normal Tuesday, Claire taught 4 classes, supervised studio time, cleaned brushes, answered 1 email about field trip buses, texted her sister, and walked out. That's it. There's no coded message in that. There's no hidden second life. She kept a calendar in her top drawer listing upcoming events: Parent-Teacher Night, October 21st, Gallery Night, November 12th, Winter Art Show, December 10th. You don't write future dates if you're planning to vanish today. You write them if you expect to show up. Rumors filled vacuum the way fog fills a hollow. Some said Claire had planned to meet someone secretly. Some swore they'd seen a stranger in a black hoodie hanging around the park the week before. Others whispered Jason's name because saying it out loud acknowledged a possibility they didn't want to own. Jason Ward came in with an attorney and an alibi, key card logs and 3 co-workers placing him in a Burlington conference room until 6:02 p.m. the day Claire disappeared. He was blunt in interviews, controlled, careful, occasionally brittle. Grief can look like guilt if you need it to. Guilt can look like grief if you don't. Detectives didn't clear him. They didn't arrest him. They put his name on a whiteboard and drew lines to others. Kramer, Leo, the hoodie, the SUV, anyone who called Claire after 4:30 that week. They pushed every line until it held or snapped. Maplewood Park's beauty was its hazard. The east path bent behind a stand of pines that killed sightlines. In fog, lamps turned into halos that lit nothing a few feet beyond themselves. Sound dampened. Footsteps approached as shape, then shoes, then breath. A person could stand just beyond the bend and have enough time to say a name that freezes another person where they are. Teachers retraced Claire's route on October 14th at the same hour. Mr. Chen, the biology teacher, timed it with a stopwatch. 7 minutes, 40 seconds at a normal pace. 6 minutes, 10 seconds at a hurry. He drew those numbers on his classroom whiteboard and told students, "The distance between here and gone is a math problem that shouldn't exist." The kids in that room went quiet in a way teenagers rarely do. Routines become defiance after a disappearance. Parents walked kids to school. Runners swapped the park for the track. The bar closed early because the owner couldn't stand the empty stool where Claire used to sit on Thursdays, sketching patrons with a mechanical pencil and handing them the drawings with a laugh. Rebecca started sleeping on Claire's couch. The kettle on the stove set for tea, she poured and forgot to drink. Elaine left the porch light on in Rutland, a beacon that disobeyed geography. Thomas drove the route from school to the bench and back until the car's GPS suggested it as home. At the Sunday vigil, the choir sang, Abide with me. Candles trembled in the damp air. A pastor, careful all week, finally said the word. Abducted. It wasn't an official term yet. It felt like the truth the town had avoided to protect itself. Investigators walked Claire's classroom, her attic room, her locker, her desk. They weren't treasure hunting. They were mapping risk. Who had access to a spare key? Who knew her class schedule? Who knew she'd switched routes on October 12th? Whose contact in her phone listed as a single initial? There were two, both checked out. One a parent volunteer, one a vendor for gallery night frames. They found a receipt for a deadbolt dated 9/27 and an installation appointment card for 10/13. They found a printed email from a guidance counselor about a student struggling at home. Nothing to do with Claire's case. Everything to do with her attention. They found thank you notes half written for volunteers. A scarf folded with a sticky note that read, "Return to Mrs. Lang." None of it was scandalous. All of it was human. It's easier psychologically to believe a stranger did this. If a stranger takes someone, there's nothing you could have done. If someone you know does it, then your map of the world is wrong, and that hurts more than fear. Claire's life didn't point to flight. It didn't point to self-erasure. It pointed to planning, presence, routine, and a community that expected to see her tomorrow. So, the question bent back toward familiarity. Who knew Claire's Tuesday? Who understood the fog in Maplewood? Who used a blocked 12-second call to steer a path? Detectives didn't answer that in part 4 of this story. What they did was remove the answers that didn't fit. Claire didn't run. Claire didn't forget her phone and her coat in her bag and her own nature. Somebody interrupted a life that was pointed forward. Claire's routines gave police a map, people to interview, places to rewalk, habits to weigh against minutes that refused to move. Her relationships gave them motive and means, not proof yet, but direction. And her words, "I need to be more careful," became a lens through which every lead was tested. Someone matched her steps that afternoon. Someone knew when the path bent and the lamps went dim. And the first real break wouldn't come from a dramatic confession or a perfect camera angle. It would come from a small, specific detail left by a person who believed fog could hide them forever. It had been 19 years since anyone in Willow Creek had spoken Emily Harper's name in anything but a whisper. In the basement evidence room of the Willow Creek Police Department, her case file sat wedged between dozens of others, its manila folder worn soft at the edges, its photos faded by time. The smiling young woman in those pictures, brown hair, bright eyes, a life ahead of her, now existed only in memory. For the detectives who had worked the case, the trail had gone cold long ago. Leads had dried up, witnesses had moved away or died. What little physical evidence they'd collected in 2003 had yielded nothing new, despite advances in forensics. That afternoon, Sergeant Mark Ellison sat at his desk, half focused on paperwork, when his desk phone rang. He almost didn't answer. "Willow Creek PD, Sergeant Rollins." The voice on the other end was soft, shaky, female, middle-aged. "You don't know me, but I used to live with a man named Derek Miles." Rollins straightened slightly, pen in hand. She hesitated, breath catching audibly. "I think I know something about the girl who went missing. Emily Harper." The last time anyone outside law enforcement had mentioned Emily's name to Rollins was years ago. "Ma'am, what exactly are you saying?" Her next sentence made his stomach drop. "Derek. He told me what happened. He confessed everything, but not to the police." Her name was Clara Bennett, 45. A quiet woman living on the outskirts of Helena, Montana. Back in 2016, she had put an ad online for a spare room in her weathered 2-story home. It was a simple listing: 1 furnished bedroom, shared kitchen, quiet neighborhood. The man who answered was Derek Miles, mid-40s, gaunt, with close-cropped hair and eyes that didn't seem to settle on one place for long. He said he worked construction, seasonal jobs, nothing steady. He was polite, but distant, speaking only when necessary. Clara didn't think much of him at first. He paid rent in cash, always on time, and rarely had visitors. He didn't leave messes. He kept his door shut. But over time, she began to notice a pattern. Derek drank. Not socially, not occasionally, nightly. And when he drank, the wall between him and the world cracked. Just enough for words to slip through. At first, they were fragments, strange comments about things you can't ever take back. Stories about fights he'd been in, the kind of bitter mutterings you ignore to keep the peace. But then came a night that Clara could never forget. It was past 1 a.m. when Clara woke to the sound of a chair scraping across the kitchen floor. She padded downstairs and found Derek slumped at the table, one elbow resting on the wood, the other hand wrapped tightly around a bottle of whiskey. The overhead bulb cast a sickly yellow light, and outside the wind hissed through the pines. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he spoke into the air as if to no one. Some things, they follow you to your grave, and if you let them slip, you're done for. Then his eyes lifted, glassy and unfocused, and he said, "She left me. Just walked away. So I made sure she'd never leave anyone again." The words chilled her. His tone wasn't theatrical, not the exaggeration of a drunk trying to shock. It was flat, final. And then, as if a dam had broken, he began to describe it. A deserted road outside of town. A light rain making the asphalt slick. A young woman in a gray sweater standing next to her car with the hazard lights flashing. Her expression, part fear, part resignation, just before she disappeared. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to ask questions, but fear pinned her tongue. She told herself it was drunken nonsense, a story cobbled together from too many late-night crime shows. What she didn't know, not then, was that every detail Derek mentioned matched the police reports on Emily Harper exactly. In the years that followed, Clara heard bits and pieces again. Sometimes Derek would mumble about Oregon or the rain when he drank. She never pressed him, partly because she didn't want to know, and partly because she feared what might happen if she did. Derek wasn't overtly violent toward her, but there was an undercurrent, a sense that beneath the quiet exterior was something unpredictable. So she stayed silent. Then, in early 2022, Derek vanished for several weeks. No note, no explanation. His room remained locked, but the garage was open. Clara went inside looking for a box of old paint supplies. She found it, but she also found something else. A small wooden box tucked behind a stack of tires. It was locked with a cheap brass latch. Her heart hammered as she opened it. Inside were only 2 items: a blue fabric hair tie, frayed and faded, a silver ring engraved with the initials E.H. She stared at them for a long time, a cold certainty settling in her gut. The initials could only mean one thing. By the time Derek returned, Clara had already made her decision. The next day, she called the Willow Creek Police Department. The Oregon State Police worked quietly with Montana authorities. They photographed the items and sent the images to Emily Harper's mother, Linda. Linda confirmed them instantly. The hair tie had been Emily's favorite. The ring had been a gift from a grandmother. The scratch inside the band was from when Emily accidentally slammed it in a locker door. The case, dormant for nearly 2 decades, was suddenly alive again. Clara agreed to become the primary witness. She signed a detailed statement recounting every conversation, every phrase Derek had used, and the night he'd painted that vivid picture of the road, the rain, and the gray sweater. On a cool June morning in 2022, officers moved in. Derek was arrested at the small rental home he'd been staying in. He didn't resist. He didn't ask why. At the station, detectives laid out the evidence. Derek denied everything. He claimed the items were junk he'd found at a flea market, but when pressed on the initials, he stumbled. He had no explanation for how Emily Harper's belongings had ended up in his possession. Months later, in court, Clara sat just feet away from the man she'd once shared a home with. The prosecutor guided her gently through her testimony. She told the jury about the night in the kitchen, the whiskey, the way Derek's voice had dropped when he said, "She'll never leave anyone again." She recounted every detail he'd given her: the road, the drizzle, the sweater, the eyes. When the prosecutor held up the silver ring and the hair tie, Clara's throat tightened. She had seen them in the garage. She had touched them, and she had known in that moment that they were proof. The defense tried to undermine her, suggesting she had misremembered or fabricated the conversations. But Clara's account never wavered. The prosecution built their case on two solid pillars: Clara's detailed testimony about Derek's own words, the physical evidence recovered from his garage. Piece by piece, they reconstructed the night Emily Harper vanished, and after 19 years, the jury finally heard the truth. It wasn't cutting-edge DNA technology or a forensic breakthrough that broke the case. It was the conscience of a woman who had carried a terrible secret for far too long. 19 years after Emily Harper disappeared, the people of Willow Creek finally saw the face of her killer. And the true shock? They had been living alongside him for almost 2 decades. March 2023. It had been almost a year since the verdict. Pine Hollow was still adjusting to the truth. The shock wasn't just about who the killer was. It was about who he had pretended to be. Derek Miles wasn't some shadowy stranger who drifted in and out of town. He was a familiar face. The man who showed up at community cleanups. The one who volunteered to help set up the annual school fair. Parents remembered him hauling boxes for the art department at Pine Hollow High, the same school where Claire had taught. People flipped through old photos from town events and froze when they spotted him in the background, smiling, laughing, standing just a few feet from the woman he would later kill. The realization was crushing. For nearly 2 decades, they'd lived alongside a man capable of unimaginable violence, and never suspected a thing. For years he walked our streets, waved to our kids, ate at our diners, all while hiding the darkest truth, one resident said. For Claire's parents, the trial brought a mix of emotions they could barely name. Outside the courthouse on the day of the verdict, her mother clutched a framed photo of Claire. Her father's hand never left hers. The crowd of reporters kept asking the same question. "How do you feel now?" Her mother's voice trembled. "We finally know who did this, but we still don't have her back." Her brother Michael spoke more bluntly. "Justice feels incomplete without her. We have a name, we have a sentence, but we don't have her." For 19 years, they'd lived in a state of suspended grief, never sure if she was alive or dead, always wondering what happened. The verdict closed one door, but left another wide open. They knew now that Claire wasn't coming home, but they also knew they could stop looking over their shoulders, stop chasing false leads, stop living in the what if. They began channeling their energy into helping other families of missing persons. They started a small foundation in Claire's name, offering resources and emotional support to people in that same unbearable limbo. Derek Miles was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's words were sharp, deliberate. "You are a calculated predator who hid in plain sight. You took a life, and you took away the peace of an entire community. You will spend the rest of your days exactly where you belong, behind bars." Throughout the sentencing, Derek sat expressionless. He didn't turn toward the Harper family. He didn't speak when given the chance to address the court. Some of his former acquaintances came to watch. A few had known him through volunteer work. Others had been neighbors years ago. They shook their heads in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the killer described in the trial. One woman whispered to a friend in the gallery, "He carried our kids' art projects in and out of the school. I can't believe it." In the weeks after sentencing, Pine Hollow came together in ways it hadn't in years. A candlelight vigil for Clare was held in front of the school. Hundreds attended, former students, colleagues, neighbors. They lined the walkway with flowers and small framed copies of Clare's paintings. The art department, where Clare had taught for nearly a decade, created a mural in her memory. It showed a field of maple trees in autumn, the same image she had been guiding her students to paint in her last class before she vanished. Parents began pushing for stricter screening for volunteers in all community events. Background checks became mandatory for anyone working with children or vulnerable groups. The local school board implemented new safety protocols and awareness training. It was a bittersweet change. The community was safer now, but only because they had learned in the hardest way possible what it meant to trust the wrong person. Clare's case didn't just change Pine Hollow. It changed policy. The collaboration between Oregon State Police and Montana authorities became a model for interstate cold case cooperation. Law enforcement agencies began hosting joint training sons on sharing information across state lines and re-interviewing old witnesses. State legislators in Oregon approved new funding for cold case units, along with technology upgrades for processing decades-old evidence. They also created a grant program for community tip hotlines, offering anonymous reporting options so people like Clara Bennett could come forward without fear. At a press conference, Detective Rollins summed it up. "We've learned that even the smallest detail, the faintest memory, can break a case open, even years later. We can't afford to stop asking questions." National news outlets picked up Clare's story. It sparked discussion on talk shows, crime podcasts, and advocacy forums. The focus was on indirect witnesses, people who hear confessions or incriminating details but hesitate to report them, unsure if they're real or afraid of retaliation. Nonprofit organizations launched awareness campaigns, urging people to report suspicious statements no matter how much time has passed. Law enforcement agencies used Clare's case in training programs for detectives, showing how a delayed tip can still lead to justice.